Let's talk about the anniversary of July's unrest last year and speak to security expert Eldred De Klerk, who's joining us now. Eldred, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time and patience. So the police minister confirming today that 86 more people of interest have now been identified in relation to the horrors that played out mainly in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng this time last year. Is that an encouraging sign then that work is being done to bring the culprits to book?
Thank you, John McKinley, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, it is, though we do understand that simply being identified as a person of interest means that the state now has to build a profile of these individuals, seek connections between them, understand where and how they've been operating, and then find evidence to convict them. So that's a long and lengthy process. That doesn't in any way so sure, it's part of our attempt to find those responsible and to punish them, because somehow that makes us feel better. That, however, doesn't, and I don't want to say that sarcastically, because that is what the state is responsible for doing. However, that doesn't take away the material and qualitative conditions under which our people live that was used and exploited to undermine the state. And that is what the expert panel also alluded to, because that's where the hard work lies. And part of doing that is reversing the neoliberal policies that has continued to see those who are rich continue to get rich or stay rich, and those who are poor getting poorer.
And we'll talk about the issues that basically shifted and perhaps even led to an escalation in the level of violence and the looting last year. But just on the issue of convictions, as you were saying, someone being a person of interest that police are tracking or looking into does not mean that they'll be arrested or even convicted, right? One of the other stats given out of that briefing today was that over 2,400 cases are on the court roll at the moment in relation to the unrest last year, but only 50 convictions so far. Why are things moving so slowly?
Because a lot of the arrest happened after the effect, and it was in the moment when we arrested somebody because we saw them with things. We stopped a particular vehicle loaded with what appeared to be looted goods, and police then saw a crime in progress and then tended to arrest said individual. Part of that is that we can't really keep all those people in prison. I hope that most of them haven't been. And our court role has also been badly affected by COVID over the last 2 years. So we may have had to convene special courts at that time to deal with that level of criminality, because those are not necessarily your instigators, but most of them are criminal and opportunistic. And maybe ordinary people who succumbed to the moment and the opportunity.
And it's one thing to deal with the aftermath of what happened last year, be it the prosecution of the instigators, the actual looters themselves in some of these communities. You look at the expert panel report, which found serious gaps in the government response, especially from the ministers in the Justice and Crime Prevention Security Cluster, I beg your pardon. And today, they were very pleased, the ministers, with the permanent appointment of a Director General at the State Security Agency. How crucial is that appointment to making sure that we don't see a repeat of July 2021?
Well, yes, to have some level of stability and competency there for somebody who can give strategic direction to the agency and to the cluster is very important. However, what we do know of what happened in July last year is that it tended to catch us all by surprise, because we underestimated the capability, the intention, the motivation, and the resourcefulness of those who were behind what happened in July. And we hope now that we are not surprised in the future. And unfortunately, to be able to thwart the kind of events that happened and during those fateful days requires tactical intelligence. And this is very hard to come by. So we do run the risk that we don't know who, what, where, and how for a next time. However, what we shouldn't be falling short on is strategic intelligence. And this is the kind of thing that the panel also alluded to, in terms of how our state agencies work together with each other, the culture that is there in terms of information sharing and intelligence cooperation, and how they work with other clusters, including business, industry, the retail sector, and including society. So it's more than just your community police forums. It's a broader societal and government response working together to try to create, to undermine and mitigate the conditions that made us vulnerable and were exploited by our adversaries.
And as we sit here today, there's still that disagreement between the former State Security Minister, Ayanda Dlodlo, and Police Minister Bheki Cele about who knew what and when, because Dlodlo maintained, even when she appeared at the hearings by the Human Rights Commission, that her department had done its job, it had shared information, passed it on, and that the failure was at response level from the likes of the SAPS. Has there been enough by way of consequences for the ministers and other people higher up in the either in the State Security Agency, SAPS, and the Defense Department for that lapse?
Well, I think the best in terms of consequences that we're going to get at this stage is to say this happened on your watch. It's in a blight on your career. I think that's about the best that we can. No single individual is likely to be held responsible, or set of individuals. Simply wholesale a change of cabinet is also not going to get us there. As I alluded to earlier, it's making sure that we now start arresting the culture, and if you can excuse the pun, but changing the culture of how we work together, and also overcoming the political disbelief that surely it can't happen, surely nobody wants to take on the state, surely we will deal with whatever comes in front of us. No, we have to overcome that political disbelief, because the adversaries have shown that they're both capable, resourceful, and they are organized enough to orchestrate the events of July last year, and they can probably do it again. Finally, I think your question is also pertinent, because it also then says that there's a schism between the state and the public. So we've got to be able to look at what do we need for our comprehensive security. And that includes protecting not just the national interest, but the national interest that alludes to food security, security of electricity supply, water, our critical infrastructure so that we can go play, meet friends, go to work, and goods can move, and that includes rail and road and air. So it's about having that conversation so that you and I can understand why it's critical, but also what role we can play, and not just government looking at us as passive recipients of service and abdicating our responsibility to them, because surely they can't do this alone.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of energy, the issue of food and security on both fronts. And South Africa is at the moment dealing with a cost of living crisis. The load shedding frustration continues. There's also been an increase in tariffs for electricity. How much do you think that the economic situation in the country this year makes us vulnerable to some kind of mass protest movement? Because we're seeing already in Mpumalanga just this week blockages by taxi drivers who say government simply has to do something to bring down the price of petrol.
Well, indeed, and government has to, in this case, also not allow business, retail, and industry to abdicate their responsibility and culpability in terms of this, for example, because the policy where workers, remember, the South African economy is based on cheap black labor, and we have to reverse that trend. That does mean that we have to have a serious conversation with the business and the commerce sector so that they do come to the party, they consider their profit margins, they consider their locations, their hiring policies, and also start to move our industry from consumerism to production and manufacture, which means an investment in our young people, an investment in our work, in our workplace, and business assuming its responsibility of turning our raw materials into products that we can use locally to be able to ensure that we build a productive economy. So this economy where our profits leave the country and we export raw material, including food supplies, that get reworked somewhere else and we buy it back, and we're completely dependent on patents and we're completely dependent on technology from elsewhere, it's going to keep us beholden, and it's going to ensure that we continue to frustrate our people.
Eldred De Klerk, good to speak to you today. Thank you for your time.